Before starting, I'd like everybody to please put your phones on silent and not create disturbance in the session. Okay, so coming to the main point now as to why we're meeting. So what is diversity to each of you, and how and what and why do you think inclusion is important in especially fields like science?
So I think it's having within STEM disciplines a representation of what actually exists in the world out there. And if you look at the way STEM disciplines are today, they don't look anything like the real world. And that's true on multiple fronts. That's true in terms of gender diversity. It's true in terms of disabled people not having access. It's true in terms of all forms of underrepresented groups not even being represented anywhere close to the percentage that they exist in the real world outside. So the worry is that science has structured itself like a gatekeeping architecture that allows only certain individuals to filter in. And it's eventually, as humanity, while we do science, we are exploring questions about nature, and it should not become a gatekeeping profession that we prevent anyone because they somehow don't quote unquote filter through this gatekeeping process to be limited from exploring whatever questions they wish to seek to ask about science. I also think it's vital for science because the way science is pursued, the way science gets produced and interpreted is also determined by the diversity of people who do science. And when you have a very limited bunch of people who are actually accessing STEM disciplines, you are going to end up with limited perspectives, limited questions that even get pursued, limited interpretations. And so I think in terms of the long-term progress of science, it's also critical that science retains this, the whole diaspora of humanity should be able to do science. So that's why I think it's vital. And I do think that if you look at it, I mean, the scientific journey starts for as long as human beings have explored nature, even before it was ever called STEM or science or anything like that. If you look at science structures today, they are very hierarchical and they are very limited and they are gatekeeping non-stop in a sense. So, yeah, I would say that's what I mean when I think about diversity in science.
So, I think diversity in science is very important because it fosters critical thinking. It puts people in the situations which is outside their comfort zone. And if we just look at the range of people who have contributed, there is no one profile, no one stereotype. Unfortunately, in spite of that, as Professor Vedya said, that the system is very hierarchical, and the people in power are the people who have very limited vision in terms of diversity.
So I'm asked a question, what is diversity? Yeah, I think our Pradhan Mantri always says Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas. So that's part of our society. We are not only this society, Union recognizes that social inclusion is a very, very important factor in the commonality in the society. This also gives you equality and equity and dignity to every individual. So more so it's important in science because if you have the same set of people coming into the science, if you have some privileged class of people coming into science, then you have there's no scope for new ideas and innovations. Science is after all innovations only and inventions. So there is a difference between innovation and invention, and this comes only when you have fresh ideas and fresh people. So this comes from different backgrounds. People coming from different backgrounds, they can bring out new ideas. So it is necessary that everybody is brought into that, and everyone gets equal opportunities. And finally, it is a merit that matters. who does better, and from all those who are good, they get the success. Success is again a definition which is very different for different individuals. What one defines success for himself is more important. So I feel it's very important that inclusiveness of everybody in the society for science is very important. And I suggest some of the students who are here, you take my example also as one of them, because I came from a very ordinary middle class family from a small town. So I could reach up to BRC and could do something is that it speaks that there is a possibility of inclusiveness in this. You need to struggle, but you will struggle. What is there in that? But you always can do something. That's a contribution one can do. Thank you. I think maybe you speak on later.
Yes, thank you, Professor Theodore. Dr. Majumdar, would you have some?
Yeah, so I guess I will just kind of step back one, and you ask the importance of diversity and inclusiveness in science. I would step back and I would ask the question, and some of the speakers very rightly pointed out that when we have inclusivity, when we have the diversity, our thought process, our creativity increases. But as I said, I will step back one, and if I say if there is no, and even if there is suppose zero outcome for that, making our society inclusive and diverse, if there is no material benefit out of it, still we should go for it. Because if we think of that, what is the purpose, or if we at all believe that there is a purpose, the purpose is to attain the individual happiness, right? Happiness for every individual. And that will happen only when the individual can get the chance to explore their possibilities, their potential. And then when we have such any kind of gatekeeping, we actually kind of curtail down that potential, and that reflects into reduction in individual happiness and obviously a collective happiness. If I come to the point of science, so some a few months or few years back, I don't recall, somewhere I have mentioned that science is democratic. And then many people objected that no, science is not democratic. That just because 80 people say something, that does not make it truth. And then I said that is a very skewed understanding of democracy. What you are talking about is a majoritarian view. It is not a democracy. Meaning of democracy is that every individual has the equal right to speak, have the equal right to express their view. If I think of me, Rahul Gandhi, Narendra Modi, all of us have a single vote to cast. Right? That is the understanding of the democracy. So I believe that science should be democratic, because in a true spirit of science, if today, even a Nobel laureate is giving a speech, being an undergrad student, I have the full right to raise my hand and ask the question and tell that, no, I don't think that is not falling in place. That is the beauty of doing science, or academia for that matter. We should try to preserve and flourish that beauty of science, that is having everyone have their kind of views expressed. And what particularly, if I talk of the science, was what this gatekeeping and all of us who are doing in science, we kind of live in our ivory tower, in our island. And the problem that creates, that we have seen very much during our pandemic time, that we actually found all of a sudden that we don't have a connection with the larger audience, larger population. What we tell, they don't understand. What they want, we don't understand. We, in a hurry, we tried to build the bridge, but we know all the all the conspiracy theory and etc. All of that thing happened. That is because we don't have the communication channels open, and that is because although we think we are inclusive and diverse, we actually don't have the representation from every part of the society. So to connect to that, to increase the individual happiness and to attain the true spirit of science, inclusivity is the only option. There is no other way, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you for the Dr. Majumdar. So I mean, coming to the representation part that Dr. Majumdar and Dr. Gupta said. So when you tell that diverse representation creates better research, even if there is nothing coming out of it, it's something productive. Could you please throw some more light on that? Dr. Majumdar, would you like to go?
So yeah, so the what I said is that, say, if I make my lab, so if I start from that, my own this thing, that my own empire, that if I make my lab diverse, right, people coming from all different gender, all different social class, all different language, and etc., as some of the panelists mentioned, that actually flourish and improve the dialogue, the way I think, or all our thought process are shaped, and Vidita probably can talk on this from her own research, are shaped by our own experiences, right? So always when I try to look for a solution for a research problem, probably my mind go in a certain way, and probably people who are coming in from my own, my background, probably they also think in a certain way. People coming from a very different background bring up something on the table which I probably could not even think of, right? So what I tried to say is that those are the tangible benefits, and those are real benefits that we know that the research has shown. So those real benefits are there. My point was that, suppose hypothetically, if we assume those points are not there, those benefits are not there, still, just to make sure that every individual in our society can attain their potential, that requires us to be inclusive. So that is what I just wanted to, I just want to emphasize on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Majumdar. Okay, Dr. Vidita, would you have?
I want to go back to an example of the Tuskegee trials. Okay, so this is just, if you think about why representation matters. Now you have trials for syphilis, in which you take a bunch of people without any informed consent. You inject a bunch of Black African Americans with syphilis without their knowledge. And this happens in the 1960s, late 50s, 60s. I wonder if you had representations of Black Americans in science, whether this would have ever happened. Now you turn around a good, 50 years later, and you ask, why does the African American community in the US, why are they hesitant to take a vaccine, for example? Why would you be surprised? Less than 50 years ago, they had ancestors who were injected with syphilis in the absence of their willingness to participate in trials and absolutely destroying informed consent. So I think it's critically important that when we talk about science, we not build it up as a pillar of absolute perfection that has not ever done anything rather horrendous to society at large. Many of the things that have emerged as a consequence of science have also had profound negative impact on the world around us. And unless we are willing to be critical of scientific establishments from within scientific establishments, we will only face horrendous backlash from the outside. There's a reason why there was such vaccine hesitancy around the world. We can either say people don't understand, we can go with the view and say people are just poorly educated, people don't read, or we can say we have failed. There is a reason why Jonas Salk did not patent the polio vaccine, which I think is one of the most impressive things that someone ever did in scientific history of vaccination. And then we have huge financial interests, we have conflicts of interest, there are national conflicts of interest, there are agendas, and then to say no, science is pure is hogwash. Science is produced by human beings, interpreted by human beings, and delivered by human beings. We certainly cannot put scientists at a higher pedestal than the average human being simply because they claim to be scientists. They can still be horrible human beings, even though they practice science. So I think in some deep sense, we have to start by internally as a STEM community looking at our own flaws. Otherwise, it will come in horrible ways which we do not want to deal with. Then we have terrible things happening, and then we have to have Scientific Temper Day, National Scientific Temper Day celebrated because we have allowed horrendous things to happen. So either we clean up our own act, and our act is well due for cleaning up. There's two ways of viewing science, right? Which is we put it on a pedestal and treat it like a religion and respect it. And then we claim that we have issues with faith. Well, we are doing very much the same in science itself. We are treating it no different than a religion almost, that we are willing to worship at the feet of science without doing the cleanup job ourselves of what is needed within scientific establishments, scientific practices. And then, there is a reason why 60% of data, for example, is not replicable. So if you don't clean up your own act, it's a matter of time that other people will come and ask you to clean up your act. And then you may not like the manner in which questions come from outside. So I think it's great to have these discussions because it's extremely important to not create an illusion about science. Science is essentially mankind asking questions, mankind, womankind, anyone asking questions about nature and finding and repeating experiments or theoretical approaches to nature and attempting to solve it. And that's not the sole privilege of someone who has a PhD. There have been profound insights that have come purely empirically and have changed humanity in a sense for centuries because of purely empirical observations. And when we create this kind of an approach, we wipe out indigenous knowledge. We wipe out the value of different ways of exploring the world. And so I think it's high time that we internally as scientific practitioners start calling out our own bad practices. Right? I mean, 60 years, 1960s is not that long back. And when you think of some of the things that have happened in the name of science, we actually have a cleanup act that is due. And a cleanup act that requires internally all of us openly talking about the problems that exist in science. So I agree with what people saying that eventually, if you have to do this by opening up, whether you want the inclusivity or not for some quote unquote productivity of science, it is vital for science to survive in the long run. It's absolutely vital, otherwise you will not allow tough questions to be asked because only few people will be there and then they will not even think of the tough questions to ask. So if you gatekeep like that, eventually it endangers the entire scientific establishment as I see it. And I think we're at that point where many questions are being asked of science and we don't have very good answers for how we have set up scientific practices in terms of the way we run the practice of science. If you read anything, it says academic cultures are toxic. When you say academic cultures are toxic, and if 40% of graduate students are clinically depressed, where the average population is 20%, if you were to look at, then you're saying that something is wrong in academic cultures. If double the number end up depressed after they start a PhD. So it can't be that either you're sub-selecting people who are prone to depression, or you're creating a universe that is enhancing the risk. So at some level, you have to ask some tough questions. I think it's high time we do it.
Definitely. The students are highly encouraged to ask questions and shoot questions anytime.
Please raise your hands and we can ask you. You can ask you.
It's like a conversation. Let's make it like a conversation.
I would just like to say that John, we think in society itself, inclusivity is part of civilization. Margaret Mead was once asked what she considers the beginning point of civilization. People thought she would talk about tools, etc. What she said was the time when I found a fractured femur and that had been healed. And that means that the person had survived having broken his leg. Somebody had taken care of him. That was the beginning of civilization. That was the beginning of cooperation. Inclusivity wants cooperation. And obviously, even the person who was taken care of did provide something to the society. And so our vision of civilization itself should have inclusivity.
Yes, so, yeah, one of the points that Vidita pointed out was, this, so, that, in academia, people are depressed and there are a lot of mental health issues that is pointing out. So, what is your take on inclusion of these, people who have these issues? Yes, Professor.
Okay. I have seen this scene for more than 25 years now. I would say in 25 years, lot of changes have come. People have started recognizing this problem, but we are still far, far away. One of the major reasons being stigma and the inability of people to take these problems seriously. Today we have a Rights of People with Disabilities Act, which does provide lot of support to the people with mental illnesses, but because of the attitudes of people in power, people with mental illnesses are not being able to use it. Just a few months back, there was a case in one of the recruitments, one of the doctors said that psychiatrists don't have metrics to measure level of disability, which is true, but that is because the science about mental illness is slowly progressing and we are not at a level where we can say that somebody is 40% disabled or 60% disabled. Somebody else might say, no, this is 20% disabled. That is why people with mental illnesses, for example, were unable to use those the very provisions which are made for them in that time. Because of the stigma, people don't come ahead and speak out about the discrimination they face. The build-up that is there has stopped academia from progressing with respect to these problems.
Yes, thank you. So, another point that was earlier brought up was, this point of upbringing. When in an upbringing, people are, coming from various backgrounds, and when these backgrounds, and when you reach a certain position, then you have to unlearn these ideas and, start accepting these, diverse backgrounds in science, or, wherever you are. So how do you break this condition? And since, our upbringing also includes a concept of meritocracy, and how do you solve this? How do you unlearn these things?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer this. One point I got what you have said, that the cleanliness in science or whatever it is that even now we are seeing plagiarism in papers. And many papers are being coming out and retraction and all retractions are happening. Such things should be avoided in science to the extent because that is a different field as compared to many other things. So that's one point. Coming to the upbringing, I think upbringing makes maybe I belong to two generations from what the students are saying, and somewhere in between you have a different generation. Our generation was different. We never had a television in the house also in our time. And then we were a big families, and the best part that I had my childhood, I think, is that there were no expectations from family. There was no expectation a child should do something and become something, It was originally the child has to come up and then do something on their own, and there was freedom not to do or do. So that was one good factor about it. Second thing is, see, you come from a village or a small town, when we came to training school in DRC, for example, we had people from different states and different backgrounds. There were people who were from cities, there were people from small towns, there were people who had research background, there were people who didn't have research background. And still, everybody had to struggle. Everyone has to struggle to come up with that And finally, it is your own individual sincerity towards work, or how honestly you are putting your effort. You can be very innocent, not knowing many things. That doesn't matter, you know. Not knowing things is after all, it's part of your life. See, because you are not exposed to the things, you will not know that. But how honest you are in addressing your problems and discussing with others, and then identifying the problem of importance, and then identifying the creativity within you. See, science requires creativity. If you don't have creativity, then it's very difficult to do research. Science is different and doing research is different. So you should be able to identify a problem and you should be able to solve the problem and attempt the problem in more creative way, which is different from everybody else. So all these have nothing to do with your upbringing. It can be a very, very individual nature, and one can be still do it, and it's only your efforts and sincerity. That's the only thing I would say.
Thank you, Dr.
Can I actually just
Yeah,
add one thing
yes.
to that point? I mean, you hear this discussion about a meritocracy associated with science, but you also hear an absolute unwillingness to discuss privilege. And these tend to go hand in hand, and I think it's impossible to discuss merit and not discuss privilege. Because most often than not, the reason why someone achieves what they achieve is because they're on the back of tons of privilege. So even when you look at, let's look at women in science. Who are the women who have managed to succeed in science and how much privilege are they carrying? You can see the gatekeeping on that itself. They are women who usually had very supportive parents. They are women who had all the opportunities of the doors being opened repeatedly, supportive spouses, supportive family members, happen to land, usually have, it's just, you just see that. And it is hard to make it without the privilege. So when you say, listen, let's give everyone an equal opportunity, it presumes that everybody is starting from the same place. People are starting from vastly different places, and so equality tends to be what people talk about, but equity requires recognizing that inherent inbuilt privilege that you carry, and there's a reason you succeed because you're walking off centuries sometimes of privilege. I'm not even going to imagine the caste related. There is no caste representation in STEM disciplines, and there's a reason why. Because for hundreds of years, you have deprived people from having the opportunity to drink a glass of water. What are we talking about, right? We were celebrating 75 years of the Azadi Mahotsav. A 9-year-old child got killed because he wasn't allowed to. So we are still far away. And if we claim to want to say what we have done right, we cannot bury and brush underneath the carpet what has gone so deeply wrong in very hierarchical structures. Caste comes in different ways. It may come as class privilege, it may come as caste in our country, it comes as race in other countries. It's the same thing showing up over and over again for humanity in different forms across the globe. And I worry with the merit argument in science because this is used left, right, and center as a tool to push people back because there is a zero recognition of the privilege that has brought you to where you are. Right? If you got there, you will say how much was it merit and how much was it privilege. I'm willing to bet it's 99% privilege and possibly 1%. You are in that position because of privilege. And you're presuming that someone else in that same opportunity, given those privileges, would not have outcompeted you. You are forgetting that it's not your life. It's your grandparents, great-grandparents, hundreds of years of accumulated privilege. So if we are not even willing to talk about this, we will wipe it out with a very rudimentary level argument saying science is a meritocracy. Those who shine will rise to the top. No. Science is like society, a highly privileged structure in which those who have the opportunity to show up at the table carrying hundreds of years of privilege may or may not succeed because of set of circumstances. So let's not, I feel we need to be honest about this, that we are, even look around this room, right? Just look how diverse are we. In most scientific circles, we are not remotely diverse. So if a person is going to have the opportunity to get to the table, then where are we talking about? So we have ways to go. And if we use the meritocracy, I think we cannot have any discussion on merit without an equal, if not stronger, discussion on privilege. So sorry, I think strongly about this. I feel like there is a reason why we also use role models of women over and over again. All of them are carrying privilege. I personally see my privilege as huge. There is a reason why language is a privilege. The manner I speak English is a privilege. It's coming from an urban upbringing with access and opportunities that someone else who did not. Then you can say, oh, this one did X or did Y or succeeded, but that's on the back of a massive amount of privilege.
I think Dr. Majumdar has.
Yeah, thanks. So I would just kind of, while Vidita was talking, I felt like, sharing a few incidents, the real life incidents, okay? One is that in 2017 or 18, I organized this 9 days Navratri Women in STEM event, and where I invited Vidita as the showstopper at the final event. And in that one, I kind of made sure that I invite people, not just the faculty members, but also our, the staff members, our, the facility manager, etc. And then they shared their journey. And my purpose was that, okay, so it started with a very vested interest that I would like to present to my own girl students that what are the opportunities there. But then it was open to the whole institute. So other students also came and we had a very good discussion. Now, it happened over all 9 days. And as I said, the faculty members starting from very young one to a first woman chemical engineer in India. So we tried to cover the whole range and everything. Now, after this 9 days of event was over, one of my girl student, Akshada, told me, but Vijit, have you noticed one thing? All of the people, particularly who came as a faculty member, they have their background and their parents were either professors, faculty somewhere, or they are coming from a very, very supportive background. And here what we are facing the problem is the problem of a non-supportive family background. I don't know what to learn from their journey because my own journey is very different from their journey. So that's, I think, a point that, that kind of strike me hard that, yes, I mean, even the role models that we are presenting, they are actually, we all came here because of a huge privilege. How I can be a quote unquote role model to a person who never had that kind of privilege. So that's one issue, one experience I just wanted to share. Another one is that, so I am born and brought up mostly in Bengal. There are a lot of caste issues which I understand now, but that point of time we used to think, oh, Bengal is free from caste and blah blah. So that is wrong, that I realize now, but I did not realize that point of time. So when I went to IIT Kanpur to do my PhD, my thought process was that, and I'm ashamed to accept that at this moment, but why there is caste-based reservation? Why do we need that? And I went there with that thought process. Now, one of my fellow PhD student, not from my own lab, but some other lab. So there was a student in my lab who is coming from a scheduled caste background. And then that student who is coming from a scheduled caste background, he did something wrong. Something wrong meaning like some experimental fault that we all do all the time. Every time we do that. That one other fellow PhD student who is a Brahmin, UPItes Brahmin, he told me over a cup of tea, when I was telling that, aaj lab mein ye hua, wo hua, he told me, chamar ka beta hai, science kya karega? That was an eye-opener for me because I know now this person will get a PhD degree from IIT Kanpur. This person will be sitting in various different, different selection panels and selection committees. If this person has this thing in his mind that chamar ka beta hai, science kya karega, will this person will allow even quote unquote chamar ka beta with merit get into the system? And then I realized that's why we still need the reservation, because, and why do we need the reservation? That, I'm just talking about caste based, but it is like of all different types of the representation, right? Starting from gender, sexuality to race, religion, language, Vidit has mentioned. So all of these, you look at any eminent institute faculty list, and the reality will be in front of you. Okay, I can tell you, 1 or 2 months ago, I was looking for the speakers for a conference in which I am a session chair, and I tried to have a gender balance. I looked into chemical engineering department of 3 highest prestigious institute in India in the chemical engineering department, not a single woman faculty. Now, if that is the situation, right? So we need to actually create space, whatever we call at merit, etc., keeping that brushing aside, create the space first to have the representation, and then we can talk about, whatever else we would like to talk about. And last point in this conversation is that when we talk about typical caste, the way we understand the caste in India, I was reading an article, sorry, I forgot the name or the details. So that article was talking about that in Indian science, we often see that we are very bad in producing or making products. We are good at thinking, we can do a lot of analysis, but when it comes to making a product or doing something hands-on, we are very bad compared to our Western counterpart. And that article argued that because we have already separated, working by hand and working by brain, we have put the working by brain at a much higher pedestal than working by hand. And as a result, in our upbringing, in our childhood, we rarely get trained. Forget about making, doing the plumbing work and, cleaning the toilet. Even the life, the life skills, cooking, washing vessels, cleaning our house, we are not trained, right? Because we look at that's a lower category of job. And historically, we think that a lower category of job because those jobs are done by people coming from the lower caste. So that affects our science adversely, consciously or subconsciously. And yes, we have to clean our act. Sooner we can do better. Thank you.
In the last point, if you see Indian science, till 8th century, science in India was of a much higher, superior quality as compared to the rest of the world. But then over the period, we had, of course, ruled by different people. But then we stopped working by our hands. Whereas the Europeans and Americans, they have picked up this working by their own hands. And that is why the science has progressed there much more than in India. This is a proven fact.
Yes. So, pressing on what Dr. Majumdar said, we see that there is a lot of double burden syndrome within women in science currently.
Can I just add something more?
Yes.
Just sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, I think the conversation is steered in a very nice direction, and we're talking about representation required. I mean, you walk on the street down at the traffic light, you will see this transgender person here often. But how many times have you seen a transgender person in science spaces? Right? How many? We have been in so many institutes in India. How many times have I ever seen a transgender person in graduate school? Never. So there's no representation. There's no. That's not a huge lack of privilege.
One is somebody in UPSC cleared one.
So that's what we have to make examples, and we have to create spaces to bring them in.
I go back to that question. That's more this. The pressure to become the role model on the singular person who shows up will be unimaginable. First of all, you imagine how hostile that climate is. Okay, and this is interesting because I was in a core committee meeting at the IIFR the other day. I'm the only woman in the room. And we're looking at new faculty recruitments, and one of the discussions was for theory physics, which hasn't had a woman in department for many years. They didn't even have a bathroom for women on the whole floor. So forget having a faculty member, they decided nobody may want to even be on the floor. I mean, it's rather ridiculous to describe it. But I'm having this conversation with my theory physics colleagues, and I said, one of the things your review committee said to you was that you should have some slightly better gender representation, but zero right now, not even one. And the response of the then chair was to say that, well, we are a merit-based system, we've not stopped anyone from ever applying to us. And then it's so easily said. And of course, it's a form of, it's such a hostile climate. Think of a young woman theoretical physics person applying as an assistant professor to this department of only men. Why would this be a remotely hospitable climate for which to enter, work, go through tenure track, be evaluated for promotions, discuss maternity leave? How is this even going to be a remotely pleasant time? So unless you do active recruitment, and this is going to become interesting to see. So IIC just put out on Twitter their first set of ads categorically saying they want women faculty. Advertisement for women faculty, which created strife among men with the perspective that, oh no, now we are reserving categories for women. But that's because there are no women. There is a reason you're trying to normalize it slightly, right? So this feeling, because we are such a big country with so many people competing for so few things, is you as somebody takes away something, now I will not get something else. There's always this feeling that it is being taken away, the apple is being taken away from you, something is being taken away from you. But when you carry privilege, your access is much more. You will have more opportunities. There is a limit on access for those who are not carrying the same privileges are huge. But just coming back to the point, you were raising.
Yeah, particularly.
And
Here
then,
we are talking about, say, for example, the women faculty applying to theoretical physics, but in transgender spaces, the rate of dropout, school dropout is 80% by the time they're at 8th grade.
absolutely.
Where are they going to come into scientific spaces?
Absolutely, and the one or two who do.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the burden of becoming the role model non-stop? Because likely they also carried some privileges, likely because of familial support / people who believed in them, allowing for the possibility of making a break into a very gatekeeping space. But then the pressure is also interminable on them too, because they are considered the singular data point that the community has. If they don't do well, the implication is everybody else who is like this will not do well. Which is, never applied to large numbers of incompetent men. Sorry.
May I just?
I'm going to just say this because it is true. You often see this. You will often see this in situations where directors are being chosen. This is going to get recorded. I should watch it. But it's true because when you have large numbers, you're not having that discussion. You're never worried that you have one incompetent director. Because there are n number, when it was happened to be a woman or happened to be somebody who's transgender, then it will be used as the example of how this person was so terrible that never again will you ever think about having a person from this community or background or to in that situation. But this person was so bad, so automatically everybody else ever who looks like that will also be.
Sorry.
Director General CSAR. She is Dr. Khaled Seddish. She doesn't come from a privileged class, and she is not even a fellow of any academies. That is what academy mafia is also not there. In that. I know all that, and that she doesn't belong to that. And she is not even a Bharat SSP award. She doesn't have. But still she was selected based on her. That work is also not so much visible, but she was picked up because of her contribution to a particular activity that she has worked in the Cayman countries. So I think we are seeing some change in the system. Change is slow, but it requires much more. But then again, getting reservations, I don't believe in that reservation. Get into the things because you are reserved. You have 30% reservation in medical entrance and MBBS seats and engineering seats. And I have seen that my child, when she went for MBBS, 50% girls are already there. Where is the need for 30% reservation in that? See, why do you want to brand them as a reserved category? They are already there. More than 50% join for MBBS in the entry level. Or if you see IITs also, you see many people joining. But then,
no, madam, I am from IITB and I would really like to kind of, intervene. Sorry to interrupt you in your talk. Where there are already representation, I completely understand that. But engineering colleges, girls are not there, not there. In my class of 70 students, I see 3 to 4 girls. Okay, and that is in chemical engineering. If we go to mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, in a class of 140 students, you will see 1 or 2 girls. So they are not there.
Not physics, not computer science.
Yes, yes, yes.
Biology, if people hadn't given this kind of advantage to the women in biology some 30 years back. So you needed 30 years to get to this point.
Even now, even in biology, even though you start with 50% at PhD level, it's already down to 20%, 15% at senior faculty level. When you move to chairpersons of departments, directors of institutions, you're
Exactly.
counting on the representation. So
if we start now, it will come much later.
In a contrary point of view, which is these are taxpayer-funded institutions. Okay, you are paying for this as a taxpayer of this country. I think the country has a responsibility to ensure representation. And if it means that for a bit of time we have to lean the other way, it is after centuries of having only sat on one side. So I'm of the view that we need to actively look at, and I'm really happy to see IISc went out with a targeted advertisement, probably because they got pushed, not because they internally got some huge insight. But I think that is coming, because otherwise we are really, I mean, it's just no diversity, absolutely none. And there'll be only one every now and then represent. You're really struggling to find people that, even if you look at these academies, which I love the idea that you use the word mafia, the number of women there are also extremely few. So
for all the IITs, so far we don't have any woman director. Swati Patankar became the woman dean few years ago. So she was the first woman dean in any IITs. So I mean, it is, I mean, you know, when we see those facts and figures in front of us, it just becomes so difficult to swallow. We can think of, oh yeah, everything is hunky-dory, but when the numbers are in front of us, it is very difficult to swallow.
Yes.
My question is to all the panelists. Based on your knowledge or experience, would you say that this underrepresentation or lack of inclusivity is more for science than other professions? And if so, why is that? What is different about science that there is this growth?
Think about it. Do you have an answer already?
So if I compare science and arts, or inside the academia, then the gender inequality is obviously based on our perception that the woman can do maths, woman can do science, and so that is the origin of the gender inequality I can think of. Also, for the all other kind of inequality, or the lack of diversity in academia, if I think of in the broader sense, I think that also has a historical thought process that, I mean, as we are saying, academia is a high pedestal thing that we have always thought of that way, that people who do the research and study, they are the highest class of people in the society. And I guess, that is the one kind of region that as I was saying, chamar ka beta hai, science kya karega? No one will ask ke chamar ka beta hai, bank mein kaam kya karega? But when they say ke chamar ka beta hai, science kya karega, meaning they think ke to do science or to be in academia, you need to have some blood and some gene. So I think that is one reason might be.
I have to say this, that I think the representation is especially low in, say, higher education. Say if you go to college level, the number of women is much more. And also in certain subjects like mathematics or computer science, apparently it wasn't that bad earlier, but nowadays it has, and also say physics of course is horrible. And one of the reasons is that it is still perceived that whatever a woman does, her role, she has to take care of the house. And till that labor is recognized, till the number of hours spent there is recognized, places like higher education or places high pressure jobs like in the computer software world, it would continue like this. And in maths and physics, I think there is a lot of gatekeeping, and women are just not encouraged. They are taught right from childhood that you cannot do maths.
There's also a lot of interesting discussion on whether the world and the way people do academia will change based on the people who are there. So we know this from animal models that even cognitive tasks are sometimes processed inherently differently by different sexes. There can be sex-dependent changes in the manner, and there is a lot of psychology-related, cognitive psychology-related evidence that women tend to work very effectively in collaborative teams. And team-based science sometimes really flowers under large groups which include women. This might actually be a very good thing for science, because right now we have a selection pressure in science that is pulling out individuals. Our entire reward system, prizes, awards, recognition is individual. And yet the production of science is collaborative. So when you look at it, there's a paper that comes out from my lab, and the last author, the person who was at the bench doing the large amount of work, is the first author who was the graduate student. But the awards and the recognitions tend to come to the person who's running the group. So we still haven't figured out a recognition process. So if you say that systems like this require recognition, require societal recognition or community recognition, then we need to even look at our recognition mechanisms of awards and grants, etc. That we tend to create a very steep power hierarchy. So the head of the lab, the chair of the department, that becomes whereas the work is produced by teams. And it's usually the graduate student. So a great example of this is Jocelyn Bernal, who didn't get the Nobel Prize, right? So it's an example of how we also, because there is a limit on the number of people you can give the Nobel Prize. So we need to have how do we handle that when it's like a LIGO project of that scale? What will you do when science becomes so large and it is moving in that direction? More and more, the very large collaborative groups. How will you recognize or reward that kind of science if you have such an individual, like one person has to be the one who recognizes, So I do think from that perspective, it's going to be very interesting to see if the culture of science also changes based on people who come in, because they discuss things a little bit differently. They think about it a little differently, and they challenge each other to say, is this the best way we can do this, or is there an alternative way we can even think about this? We have to only think about.
The question is different. She wants to know.
She's asking if, I kind of segued from that into saying that I don't really know. I'm sure that women in the corporate world have similar challenges to women in the science world. I can't imagine that they don't. Because we live in deeply patriarchal societies. The patriarchy is steeped in. And because it's so steeped in, it's going to show up in multiple places in multiple different ways. It shows up in science, but I can't imagine it doesn't show up in other disciplines. How can it not? It shows up in our everyday interactions, ways of being, etc. Presuming what you can or cannot do. I'll give you an example. We had, oh my God, my institute is not going to be happy with me by the end of this. And we have to knock on the door to be let back in again, gatekeeping. Huh? No, so we had a young lady postdoc. Excellent, showed up, and we had a housing challenge on the TRPAR Colaba campus, right? So at that point in time, there were no apartments available in Colaba. So we had rented out apartments in Vadala. And only an apartment in Vadala would have been available for her, which was fine. There's an apartment. Mumbai is a difficult city to find housing, so there was an apartment. But around the table, there was a discussion where a senior faculty member said, but she's a woman. So how can she? So I was thinking there are no women in Vadala. I mean, I couldn't even believe it. So I just sat with my mouth wide open and shocked. I couldn't believe the discussion, but this is patriarchy showing up in a completely different way. It was couched as protection. It's couched in the term, oh no, this poor thing, she'll have to travel at night. It's her choice. Leave her the option that here's an Vatala flat. She may choose to come. There are many women who travel from Vatala every day. I'm sure who also have night jobs sometimes. So how would you make the decision for her and not even give her the offer letter, because as a woman postdoc, she should be housed on the Kolaba. So sometimes it gets couched in the most protective kind of, like it's an older gentleman saying, oh, this poor young girl, how is she going to manage in Vadala? But leave her the choice. So it's a patriarchy raises its ugly head in many different places, unfortunately.
Questions?
Thank you. Yes, I think Hitesh has a question.
So, we were on the topic of reservation in India. So, I see a point in affirmative action being there to make up for this skew in, say, academia caused by, say, oppression and privilege. But when these percentages of reservation for these classes, when all of this is determined, we know for a fact that it is not perfect. So there are various kinds of oppressions in play in society. So when all of this is in play, a percentage of reservation determined this way, will it not produce a different kind of skew that might possibly be worse than the original skew? So say, for example, so historically, let's just say that a Brahmin could live a respectable life regardless of whether he was poor or rich. Whereas a person from an oppressed class could possibly never be able to earn a respectable living back in the day. But now the dynamic has changed with money coming into the play. So say this sort of reservation there could be a gatekeeping within the communities where the people who need it the most within the community, the benefits will not trickle down to them. And there are so many kinds of oppressions, all the reservation will possibly not be able to make up for all these communities that need to be preserved. So this sort of skew, what can be done about this?
Yeah, see, it is possible that misuse is there in every system, even in the reservations. But you are giving opportunities, especially the reservation that you are talking about. And I think that reservation was really required. See, probably there was a misuse, and many people generations are misusing the reservation policy and all. But still, it gave them opportunity, and it slowly is bringing them into the mainstream. You can see the example of Tamil Nadu, how they have the Dravidian parties brought out the reservations and brought many people into the mainstream, different castes and all. So it's possible everywhere. Reservation means misuse is always there. But leave aside that, but it will bring many people to the mainstream. And that's what is my feeling.
May I just add a point here? So I think what he has said, one of the very valid point is that the intersectionality of the problems, right? That if we think of, say, also in each community, there are multiple layers, right? Say someone coming from and the LGBTQIA person coming from a village versus coming from an urban setup, English speaking versus non-English speaking, having the exposure to the internet versus not. So everyone, if I go to a finer details, everyone has their own sort of journey, and not, nowhere two persons are equal, right? So, so that's why, as Madam was saying, that we kind of think of the policies to get the statistics that of where the statistics is, and keeping the broader statistics is in mind, rather than thinking of very individual case by case basis. And just in terms of the kind of the reservation, and just a passing comment that when people talk about the caste-based reservation, I say, yeah, I will be very happy when the caste-based reservation will be taken away from the position of the priests in the temple. The day you are ready to appoint a lower caste person, as a priest in the temple, then you can take away reservation from other places, caste-based reservation. Yeah, that's all.
So, what do you think can be done about this? So,
I think the argument or the point you're making is how do you bring in nuance into something like this? And I think that point is raised again by Amrut when he says intersectionality becomes so critical. And you have economic basis for reservations, you have caste basis, you have variety of factors could come in. Part of the problem with India has always been implementation and not this or not its rules. Very often our laws are in the right place, very often we have, in fact, many things in our constitution are in the right place. Many things actually, when you look at it very carefully, are in the right place. We just mess up in implementation terribly on multiple levels. And so this becomes a question of, it's a law, order, and practice of a policy issue. Because it gets violated so often in little ways and big ways that then there's a sense of pushback against the conceptual idea in its entirety. And obviously then people feel, different communities feel more shortchanged and push for even more presence of the pie, and there's always a perception that the pie is shrinking and you'll be left with not even a sliver by the end. And that is an inevitable feeling that is experienced by everyone. So I don't have an answer. I think this is a complex situation, and if you think about it, we are 75 years into running this country independent of the colonial history which we carry deeply ingrained into the way we function today. I can't imagine this is resolving for several hundreds of years more. That's no reason to not push away at it and keep trying. That also means we have to got it right. And that there will be many missteps in this journey, but we've done the other, and that got us here. So I think we have to try. There's no choice but to try actively to make sure there's more equity.
The main problem, as Mr. Monila said, is intersectionality that adds a subtleness in the problem, which just these simple, the change has to be at the societal level. Till the change comes at the societal level, even say within the communities, the hierarchies are merged. We cannot solve these problems. And another thing is that these problems have been there for 2000 years. I don't think we should expect that we can solve it all in 75 years. We have to make sure that we are moving in the right direction, even if incrementally.
Thank you for that insight. So I think we are approaching the time that we had. So to end on a okay.
So I understand that reservation helps, as ma'am said, ma'am. As ma'am said that now situation is better than before. It's slowly developing, but we have an example. We have example of Finland, where gender equality is like when the society is more gender equal, but still women are underrepresented in STEM fields. Whereas on the contrary, countries like Algeria, where women actually guide rules and regulations are against women, still STEM representation, like women representation in STEM is higher than compared to developed nation. So shouldn't we talk about providing privilege to the underrepresented represented section of society, like providing good schooling for what sir have mentioned already, plan center and manual scavengers who are mostly comprised of people from outcasted people. Why are we so focused on the result oriented thing, considering what the final result is rather than improving and providing privilege to the underrepresented people? why are we still focused on what the result is? As in,
I'm not sure I fully understand, so if possible, I might answer wrong. And please correct me if my response is not answering the question you have, but Finland is first of all a Scandinavian country. I lived in Sweden for a year, so it's rather close and I spent a bit of time in Finland. Finland is a remarkable education system, but it is still a patriarchal construct. There's no reason to believe that Scandinavian countries don't have a deep patriarchal construct. They very much still do, despite excellent social welfare policies. A fantastic paternity leave, for example, which is far more equitable than anywhere else in the world. The reason why numbers in Iran, Algeria often show up higher for women in STEM is because those are not aspirational jobs financially for men. So you have to also keep in mind societal structures. For example, even if you look at India and you look at people entering the STEM disciplines versus computer science, you see a major wave that move towards financially more remunerative jobs than the academic spaces. So much the same way, that's actually true across not just Algeria, but many Islamic countries where you see large 60% representation of women in the STEM disciplines, because those are not financially highly remunerative, and it's also patriarchally considered okay for a woman to be a teacher. It's a safe job, yeah, it's a teacher, it's that kind of a. So yes, it's true that there will be a reflection of what the society values, plus what the state decides as available policy. But India shouldn't use a 9 million or 10 million, there's a half the population of Churchgate at any time. We cannot draw policies from Scandinavia that will automatically apply to a country of 1.2 billion people. We have large-scale problems with each state itself is like a different country in and of its own capability, right? But also state-level resolution to make. I do feel from the point that you raised about, reservation being particularly given to those who are most marginalized, I would agree. And that comes back to the point of intersectionality yet again, which is absolutely there will be, in fact, even within that community, like you mentioned manual scavenging, but women will be even more disadvantaged within that sub-community, which has been studied quite extensively, that even within the marginalized, there are hierarchies there of the degree of, deprivation. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question. I'm just saying that it helps. I mean, having lived in Scandinavia, I have benefited much from what that world looks like. It has its own issues, but it is still a fairly patriarchal society.
Yes, okay. But ma'am, still the one second part of the question was left, that why are not we discussing about providing privileges to the underrepresented section? Like this discussion, usually the discussion you'll see will
mostly talk about that there is underprivileged people, and rather than discussing and talking about reservations, rather than talking about how many schools are there for underprivileged people, are we providing them the basic necessities, or shall we provide?
I agree. I think you're absolutely right. Primary education should be what the government does. Primary healthcare should be what the government does. Primary infrastructure is what the government should be doing. We shouldn't be outsourcing primary healthcare and primary education to private players. That is absolutely a governmental job.
I guess,
use our vote to effectively demand that of those who we vote into power. That's all we can do. I mean, that's what we can do as individual citizens. I expect that of our political masters and hold them accountable, which we have forgotten how to do in many years. So, the truth.
I guess, no one here is saying that you should not make the primary education, equitable and affordable and, for everyone. Probably because all of the panelists are here coming from the higher academic setup, so the higher education. So our discussion is going in that direction. If the panelists were the primary school teacher, probably the discussion would be very different. So,
also, see, a lot of social mobility comes from the kind of job one holds. Many people say a student from a manual scavenger's family, if there exists such a person, he gets such an opportunity, he or she gets such an opportunity, would want a job maybe in a research institute as a researcher because of social mobility at one level. are you ready to pay the manual scavenger much more than what the researcher earns? Give them the kind of medical benefits, life insurance that a researcher has?
Researcher.
Of course, the medical facilities that we get.
That is only a section of scientists that we have.
Yeah, but are you ready to give that to the manual scavenger's family?
No, I think.
May I just add one point here? So, also as we are talking about the intersection, it is just a very recent, event happened in one of the Delhi public school, DPS. The mother was a teacher in DPS. So the first of all, it is DPS. So you can understand from what social strata it is coming. Second, the mother was a teacher of that school itself. So it is not that the person was not voiceless, but still this 9th standard student, because we really don't know now, but probably she has a different gender expression. He was, so I am using the surname he because that's what the last used for him. So he was so bullied and he was stripped off in the classroom that finally, even so the mother actually complained to the school brushed that off, that, oh no, he needs to be stronger. And in this effort to that, one needs to stronger, one needs to fit in, one needs to be normal. In that struggle, finally that boy of 9th standard, he committed suicide. So what I'm trying to again kind of stress upon is that the struggles are multifaceted. It is not just one, right? Even if you give all the facility, all the access even in the childhood, still there will be struggle at a later stage because of our societal structure. So just providing, first of all, I completely agree with Vidita and others that yes, the healthcare and the primary education, primary infrastructure should be public funded and accessible to all. But even if we make everything accessible to all, still at a later stage, the struggle is there. It does not go away with that. So that's it. Thanks.
Yes, on that note, I think we should end the session here. Does the audience have anything to add or say about how maybe we could make a small place like CEBS more inclusive to everybody?
But do you have a doubt that it is not inclusive?
No, definitely not.
So then
It's
we are in the right direction.
She's asking whether you think CBS is inclusive or not.
Honestly, what I think is, there is always more scope of improvement.
In what way?
That is what I'm opening this for.
There's somebody,
Yes.
there are people who raise their hands.
May I just add again one point? Sorry, I'm interrupting a lot, but I'm really sorry about that.
Yes, sir.
So, as Madam was asking in what way, again, I'm just sharing my own experience, right? So I have a friend who is visually impaired, and then, he is a faculty member in one of the universities, and then in one class, in one discussion, he asked me that, do you have students who are visually impaired? And I say that, see, in our engineering, I don't even imagine that I can have a blind student for that matter. So then he said that, okay, may not be the blind student, but who find it difficult to read from the printouts. And do you need to print your question paper in a larger font just for that student? And in that batch, I inquired, and actually I found there was a student who find it very difficult. He needs to take the question paper up to this to read that. And for that student, I made a question paper with a larger font. So what I'm trying to say here is that even if we believe that we are all equitable and everything is good, there are things at the corner which we even don't realize that it is there. In the various different conferences, or say that, for example, again, I was doing a YouTube channel in Bengali to explain the basics of scientific research, etc. And there I was showing a lot of images. And again, that friend told me, you are never explaining the images. You expected that everyone watching your video can see the images. That's not true. So you need to explain your images when you are giving your talk in an online platform. So I just thought to add these 2 points because we did not talk about disability much. So, but it is also a personal experience that there are a lot of nooks and corners in our own household which needs cleaning. Apparently, it may look very clean, but if you dust from your, bed के नीचे से या घर के कोने से, lot of कचरे हर एक जगह से निकलने वाले हैं. Thank you.
I mean, it doesn't take much to just notice the absence of ramps. If you happen to have a disabled person on this panel, they wouldn't have been able to get up here.
No, but
it's true for all of large institutions across the city of Mumbai. The airport, for example, didn't have ramps for the longest time until we got pushed in a review committee discussion. This is why being reviewed is so useful, and being reviewed by people with different backgrounds, because they call out your things that are not necessarily obvious to you, right? I didn't realize it because I can walk. I wasn't in a wheelchair. So I wasn't paying attention to it. But when somebody pointed it out, then you realize, oh my God, nobody will be able to access anything in any of these buildings because everything is steps. And there's absolutely no planks for anyone who is on any kind of wheelchair access. So there are so many places that we lack equity.
This is where a person with disability can enhance the institute. I can say I had a teacher in math science. He had multiple sclerosis, and because of him, math science was one of the first institutes to be fully wheelchair. Yeah, math science and ISI he used to visit.
Vidita, you won't believe, and I mean, you may feel that I am kind of making it up. I was in a conference where I was giving the talk on DAEs. They had a ramp. The ramp starts with 2 steps. First, there are 2 steps. And
Actually, the thing I remember Sundar fighting against throughout his life, throughout his whenever he had once he had a problem.
Yes.
May I add something? So there was a point being raised about, whether CBS is inclusive or not. So, I mean, as if we are not ready to look at things and if we are not ready to listen to people, then how do we even start working towards being inclusive? So, saying things like that we already are inclusive shuts down the possibility for people to come up and share their experience about the things that need to be done. So
put it before the people, that this is what is required, so that people can.
So what happens is when you're the sole person who experiences something, there's a massive barrier that allows you to speak up. You often find a way to adjust without indicating. I'll give you an example. Our department used to have department meetings at 7 o'clock. All daycare centers are shut by 7 o'clock. People who have people helping them at home are gone by 7 o'clock. If you have young kids at home, you cannot have a meeting at 7 o'clock. It's unacceptable. Because who's going to look after the child? So if you have no women in your department, and it's largely men who expect the spouse to do the predominant child care, then they will arrange a meeting at 7 o'clock. And if you're the only woman there, you may hesitate to say, can we not do it at 7 o'clock? You will find a way to find a friend, an auntie, a grandmother, or somebody to help you, because you can't speak and say, please don't arrange a meeting at 7. It's not possible for me to manage. I have caregiving responsibilities. I can't do it. So the onus for equity and inclusion is not on the person who's carrying the least amount of privilege. It is actually on the person who carries the most amount of privilege to actually open the table for discussion and ask, is this a fair practice? Who are we eliminating in the process of this practice? Who are we wiping out from being available on the table? And the onus cannot be on those who are it's just an unfair. So I just can answer to that question. I think by definition, most institutions in India should start with the presumption that they're non-equitable, they're non-diverse, and non-inclusive. It's a good working point to start with, that working presumption for academia in India. It's also true for academia much all over the world. Let's start with a working presumption we are not. And then allow people to speak up, perhaps in careful spaces where they feel safe and protected to voice their opinions, and then widen the debate and let it be spearheaded by people who carry more privilege and may not feel the consequences of raising their voice. The onus cannot be on those who are the most vulnerable and they carry the greatest hits of speaking up for themselves. We are the ones who carry the privilege and speak up. As I said, hopefully they let me back into the air.
On that spirited note, maybe we should conclude the session.
Thank you, speakers.
Thankfulness to everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Uh,
Bye-bye.
And
Take care.
Yes, yes, we
Yeah, so you brought up a point as to whether CBS is, I think we should have more time allocated.
We do, but in shortage of time because we have other
And
reasons.
ma'am had asked, ma'am had made a counterpoint as to like, do you have any doubt that CBS is, and everyone now, as if there is no problem in CBS. And I was going to tell one personal experience of mine in my own lab that I worked in. I see as a male, I have a privilege in my own lab, which I don't like at CBS. I'm allowed, I was able to work in the night till like 9 p.m. And a fellow student of mine who was a girl, and she was like not taken by a postdoc just because she was a girl, and the postdoc wanted the student to work till 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. So that just made me very angry at that point, and I wanted to point that out because we all think everything is very CBS. It is not.
So, what next?
maybe just give
Yeah.
I'll take a picture.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to take a picture?
Okay, right here. Sorry.
Madam, you want to come here? Take a picture. One picture.
How come you are most effective chair of the
Atif, you have moderate.
Bajinda?
Science club आजा हम ना सब आजा कहाँ है असली कहाँ है
Second program.
Oh.
Now not as much.
Thank you.
Until the judges elect for the next session, which is student talk session. It's called Leegavati's Granddaughter. I will be in a short moment of time. I will be talking about why have we named this session Leegavati's Granddaughter, and then we will start with the talks by CBS students who will be talking about contemporary Indian women in science.